welcome everyone this morning. So we'll start with a little meditation, like usual, to focus the mind and generate positive motivation. And then we'll go into the actual session. So get comfortable on your meditation cushion. So sit comfortably, legs crossed, your torso erect. Check that your chest is open, you can breathe deeply. But then while we meditate, we usually just breathe normally. But sometimes at the beginning it helps to open up your lungs and chest by taking a few deep breaths. And then gradually draw your attention inwards. So briefly scan through your body to see that every part of your body is relaxed, comfortable. If you feel any tension or tightness, discomfort, then imagine your breath, as you inhale your breath coming into that part of your body. And then as you exhale, any tension or tightness just flowing out and merging with the earth. And then gradually bring your attention to your breath, to the process of breathing. Maybe this morning we can try focusing our attention. There's different ways to focus on the breath, to watch the breath, right? So this morning let's try watching the breath at the tip of the nostrils. It's just at the edge of your nostrils. So just breathe naturally. And then just try to focus all of your attention on the sensation of the breath as it passes through your nostrils, at the edge of the nostrils, the tip of your nose. So this is just one object to use to focus the mind, to practice place in the meditation, where we place our attention on a single object and just try to keep our awareness there without it wavering or without becoming distracted. So take this sensation at the tip of the nostrils as your object, and then generate the intention, in order to generate better concentration, better mental focus. I'll practice trying to watch this sensation for the next 5 minutes. And then we'll begin just watching, observing the breath, breathing naturally and watching the sensation at the tip of the nostrils as the air passes, in as we inhale and out as we exhale. And watching all the sensations, coolness, warmth, moistness, dryness. The breath is long or short, so forth. And then with 20% of the mind, kind of like an observer, observe your own awareness to see if you're actually staying focused on the object, or inevitably, when your mind wanders off, to try to catch your mind wandering, to see that you become distracted. Recognize that and let go of whatever it is your mind's being distracted to, whether it's thoughts or sounds or other sensations. Just let go of that and bring your attention back to the breath and continue watching. Okay? So we'll try to practice like that for about 5 minutes, just observing the breath. So then relax your attention on the breath. And so then to generate a positive motivation, we'll do a kind of simplified metta meditation, or meditation, kind of simple version of loving kindness. So why don't we begin by focusing just your attention on yourself in general, and try to generate the thought, as authentically as you can, or whatever suits you. But think, now we're going to be together from now until 1 o'clock. So then, during this session, whatever I do, may it be beneficial for me. First yourself, and then we'll think about others, right? So take a couple minutes and just think, try to generate the intention, even though you don't know what's going to happen exactly yet. But whatever happens in the next 3 hours, may it be beneficial, may it benefit me, may it be beneficial for me. You don't have to know what's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but just to have that fundamental intention is something positive, right? So then what we do, motivated by that intention, becomes virtuous. So then it thereby becomes a cause of happiness. So take a couple minutes and just try to generate this intention, this thought, in a sincere way, whatever suits you. And try to think, whatever I'm doing in the next 3 hours, or whatever I'm doing the rest of today, I think about the whole day and night. May it all be beneficial. Right? May it contribute to my well-being. So just in terms of yourself. So try to generate this positive motivation. And then finally, think about at least one other person. And if you like, you can think of many other people, big groups of people, or even all sentient beings. But beginning with at least one other person, then just generate the same intention towards that person in relation to this session. So think, whatever I'm doing in the next 3 hours, or whatever I'm doing today, may it become directly or indirectly, again, we don't have to know exactly how, but indirectly or directly, whatever I'm doing today or in the next 3 hours, may it become beneficial for this person. Right? May it contribute to their well-being. May it bring them well-being and happiness somehow. Right? So just try to generate that intention. So this all becomes then a motivation for engaging in this session. That may bring benefit to me, may it bring benefit to others. Right, so again, for the next few minutes, again, focus on at least one other person, a group of people or more, and generate the intention towards them that whatever I'm doing now, in the next 3 hours today, may it be beneficial for this other person. So you can relax your attention. But before you totally let go, so just this last step, where we try to focus on other people, one other person or several other people, and generate the intention that whatever I'm doing may be beneficial to them. So now that we've ended that kind of period of meditation, just note in your mind the strength of that attitude. How strong did you develop that attitude in your mind? How deep was it, or how powerful was it, or how does it feel in your mind? The degree of that intention to benefit this one other person or other people that you generated. And just make a note of that and try to remember, because we'll come back to it at the end of the session later. Okay, so then we'll begin the main part of this session. So, so first of all, we're doing this session. Actually, it's supposed to be 2 sessions, right? Yesterday and today, but the one yesterday, last night, got canceled because my root group, Geshe, arrived in Bangalore. He's on his way to Bylakuppe to Sera actually for a teaching, but he's agreed to teach tomorrow. So we went to receive him, welcome him to Bangalore at the airport yesterday. So this course has been shortened to 1 session, but actually this is kind of like a, what do you call it, like a pilot program. For a TV show, before they actually release the series, they have a pilot where they test it out on a group of people. So this is like the test session actually. So if you like it, if you like what we do today and you're interested, then we can make this the science of happiness and the science of meditation into like a longer course over, maybe 4 or 5 weekends or something like that. We'll see. So you give some feedback at the end. But then having said that, my being here teaching Dharma and teaching about psychology and research on happiness and meditation is kind of a joke, right? Because I don't actually know much about those things. I don't practice and have much experience. So if you really want to get a taste of the art of happiness, the science of happiness and meditation, come to Lama Zopa's teaching tomorrow night. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, my guru, is teaching here tomorrow night from 6 to 8, right, Shanti? 6 to 8 p.m.
Yes, at least 8.
Yeah, at least 8. So tomorrow night. So if you imagine, if you suddenly heard, on the radio or the internet, you saw an announcement that Shakyamuni Buddha has come back to life and is teaching in Bangalore, would you go? Of course, Shakyamuni Buddha is world famous sage. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche coming to Bangalore and teaching is just like that. It's the same. It's very rare to meet someone with qualities like His Holiness Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or Shakyamuni Buddha. And there's other Buddhist masters too, but it's very rare to have the opportunity to meet someone who has very profound kind of experience and realization of the path to enlightenment. So it's something you shouldn't miss. So please come tomorrow. Okay, so this little course, the science of happiness and science of meditation. So first, I'll just explain some things I wrote up here. So I wrote the first three things I wrote are my sources. I've been doing a little research for this session. So one is this book, The Power of Bad, by R. Bovinster. Actually, it's about the first. I have three main outline headings. So the first is hindrances to happiness. What hinders us from having a sense of fulfillment, joy, well-being, and happiness. One thing. So that's what that's talking about mostly, is things that hinder us from having happiness. Then the second is things that contribute to our well-being and happiness. So for that, I'm mostly basing on this one book called Happier. Actually, I have the book here. Happier, by a Harvard professor. His name is Tao Ben Shahar. It's a really good book. I haven't read all of it, but a little bit of it I've looked at. It's very well written. He teaches one of the most popular courses I've covered. And then the third thing, was just, it's just a small bit of information. Actually, there's a third and fourth. An article from the BBC, called The Danger of Dwelling. So that's about rumination, mental rumination, and how that's a major factor for causing depression and anxiety, which are two of the biggest mental health problems in modern societies. And then the third source of information is actually a website called Our World in Data. Our World in Data. It's an excellent website that has a lot of statistics. It gleans research from studies done on all different things, from health, economics, education, politics, all over the world, and compare. So you can compare all this data on different issues. Compare all different countries in the world, and very clear summaries, very clear graphs and charts. So I took some information from there. Although I haven't had that much time to prepare the session, so I don't have a lot of facts and numbers and visuals to show you. But in the future, then I can put that stuff together quite easily. So the three outline headings I want to cover are first, hindrances to happiness, and I have two or three subheadings there. What hinders, happiness, and then looking at facts to get a more balanced kind of view of the world, because oftentimes the way we view the world can have a big detrimental. If we have a very pessimistic, negative view of the way the world is, then it has a very detrimental effect on our own mental well-being. And then the third is, which has the most subheadings. What are some things we can do to cultivate happiness and well-being? And that's where meditation actually comes in. Although I won't say that much about meditation today. So those are the three main outline headings. Hindrances to happiness, looking at different facts related to that, and then cultivating happiness. So the first, hindrances to happiness. So this, again, I'm drawing mostly from this book, The Power of Bad. The first thing is the negativity bias. It's called negativity bias. So this is a phenomena that's well researched in psychology, which is basically that as we develop evolutionarily, then when we're living in the jungle, as our ancestors, primates, and then as hunter-gatherers, then in order to survive, we need to give a lot of attention to things that are a danger to our life, things that are likely to harm us. Right, and things that are likely to sustain us, we need to notice, but they don't have to be forefront at our mind. If something's, some animal's attacking us, of course we're going to be most aware of that. Or if, say we live in a village on the edge of a jungle, and there's a tiger that's been killing, grabbing children and eating them or killing them, then that needs to be at the forefront of our mind, all the time. We have to be aware of and watching out for that danger. So, it's through that kind of scenario that we automatically, and also when there's something that's a danger to us, or it might potentially harm us, then it causes us, that fear causes us to have an adrenaline rush, so we have a kind of spike of emotion, and that puts a very deep imprint on our mind, right? So we remember that event very strongly. Whereas if we hear about, one of our friends really helped out another friend, we might feel, oh, that's really nice, but usually our emotion doesn't get as stirred up. So the emotion doesn't get as strong, so it doesn't make as deep an imprint on our mind, so we don't remember it so much. And also it's we don't need to remember that so much in the future. The thing that's a danger to us, or potential threat or harm, we need to remember in the future. And also because of the emotive content, it makes a deeper imprint of our mind. So negativity bias is, in short, that we tend to give a lot of attention to and remember things that are negative, that we've learned about. Things, someone harming another person, or some bad news, or I think about this virus. Now this is SARS, another SARS outbreak in China. Have you heard about it in the news the last week? Yeah, coronavirus or something. So we all know about that. We're all kind of on alert. Is someone going to land in Bangalore airport from China carrying the coronavirus, and these people in Bangalore start dying? But then there's 8 million or more than 8 million people in Bangalore who are perfectly healthy, and in China there's hundreds of millions of people who don't have that virus, but we don't think about them, right? We don't remember that. We remember the few people who have the virus. This is a kind of scenario, right? So in the news, what's reported in the news is mostly, not only, but a lot of negative things that happen. When someone's killed, or someone gets the virus, someone dies, someone's cheated, a politician cheats, or things go wrong, because that stirs up a lot of excitement. So then people want to know about that. So then they buy the newspaper, right? So media, news, they need to sell their product. They need to sell their medium, whatever, is a newspaper or online media or on the TV. So to stir up people's interest and attention, they're biased towards making a crisis out of everything. You know, some small like mistake happens, and they make a big crisis out of it, so that people get excited, so that they feel like they need to know about it, so that they're willing to spend money on the news media. So in the news media, there's a bias towards reporting negative phenomena, or reporting events in a negative way. And then also just in the way our brain is hardwired, then I shouldn't say hardwired, because I mean, the brain is plastic, we can change the wiring, the circuitry of the brain through intention. But the way we're evolutionarily kind of molded is that we give a lot of attention to things that are potentially dangerous to us or negative. So knowing that, then we can offset that by intentionally putting attention to things that are positive. By knowing the kind of innate bias that we have towards giving attention to negative things, then we can make effort to give attention to positive things. Also, like in this book, it's interesting. One finding they had was that, for example, when you're trying to train someone, like or raise a child or shape someone else's behavior, then actually, if you give negative feedback, it has a much stronger impact on the person than positive feedback. I mean, of course, positive feedback is really important, and it builds trust, builds character, builds confidence. But oftentimes, like they were saying, because I know one thing I learned when I was young in college is that whenever you give negative criticism to someone, first give like 3 or 4 positive feedbacks, and then give one negative, negative criticism.
Praising for the butt.
What? Praising before the butt. Is that what you said?
No, it can become negative if everyone does it. People say bracing for the butt, because every time someone praises you, you brace for the negative feedback.
Right.
It's not very sincere, right?
Right. It can be like that. But anyway, they're saying that's a totally mistaken kind of technique, because oftentimes people don't really register clearly the thing you're criticizing. So they're suggesting just criticize first, just be direct, say, oh, you're doing this wrong, and then after, give some positive feedback. But that the negative feedback has a much stronger, in different studies, it shows that negative feedback has a much stronger impact on people's behavior. It helps them alter their behavior much more strongly than positive feedback. Like one study they did was with teachers in schools, is like tell the teachers they told the set of teachers at the beginning of one set of teachers, right? So there's 2 groups. So one set of teachers, they told at the beginning of the year, if you can cause your students' scores to raise by every percentage point, you could cause your students' scores to raise on this final exam, you'll get a bonus. You get a bonus at the end of the year. Then for another set of teachers, they gave them this huge bonus at the beginning of the year, and then told them, for every percentage point that your students' grades are below this, we'll deduct from your bonus that you've already been given. So that's a negative feedback, right? To take away something that they already have is like a negative motivator, rather than to offer to give something for everything that they achieve as a positive motivator. So they found that the second group of teachers that they threatened to take away the bonus that they've already been given, they perform much better. They work much harder. They do much better at causing their students' scores to increase to a certain level than the ones who you're hanging the carrot for. That you're saying, if you increase, we'll give you a bonus. That's just one small study. But that book is full of kind of studies like that, like how this kind of negative bias, how it can be used, and also how it affects us in a distorted way. But what I want to emphasize here, the point I want to make here, is to check in our own mind, right? So. Maybe we just take a minute now to check, like when we look at ourselves, do we give more attention to negative things? Like if we make one mistake, do we spend more time just dwelling on that mistake, and then does that cause us to lose sight of all the things that we do well? Because if we do that, which is it's likely, then it undermines our own self-confidence. Like and it's not reality. Like we might do 9 things well in a day, but we make one mistake. And instead of remembering all those 9 things we did well, we just think about the one mistake that we made and we dwell on that for days and then totally, undermine our self-confidence and destroy our own positive self-image and kind of, feel really unhappy. We unnecessarily beat ourselves up about it. So that's an example of like negativity bias. And we do the same with relation to other people, like the friends that we have or co-workers that we have. They might do so many things really well, but then they do one thing that we don't like or we think is, wrong. And then instead of remembering all the things they did really well, the ways they helped us, sometimes I even see with myself. Sometimes some person, they help me so much, but then they do one thing that I find is kind of offensive or wrong. And you easily remember that, easily think about that, and talk about that when you talk with other people. And you forget about all these other things that they've done, to help you, and before that, right?
Venerable, 1 minute?
Yes.
I've just generally found with younger people, with a daughter, when you give negative feedback, you generally spurs them on. But with the male sex, when you give a negative, especially to a son, it really damages his self-esteem and confidence.
But it doesn't damage the self-esteem and confidence of the daughter?
It spurs her on. It may hurt her immediately, it spurs her on to her.
It spurs her on?
It spurs her on. It makes her put in more effort to improve.
It spurs her on.
Yeah. Whereas for a son, I found males get more defeated, the defeated mentality.
Okay.
I think it's not dependent on the sex or anything.
Yeah, I think that's quite a generalization.
Yes,
Anyway, let's take a moment and just, before we go on to the next outline, just reflect for yourself this negativity bias. Is that something you find in your own experience, right? With the way you look at yourself, the way you look at others, the way you look at media. So one advice they give here is don't spend a lot of time reading the newspaper or other media over and over again, because it's just going to accentuate your own negative bias and your own pessimistic view of the world. So you have to make effort, but to find other information about the world, you have to make effort. Anyway, I'll talk about that more in a minute. But let's pause here for just a couple minutes and just reflect in your own mind, like, do I have any of this negativity bias? And in what sphere? When I think about myself, when I think about another person, when I think about my community, when I think about the world at large, and what can I do to sort of counteract that? What effort can I make to balance, so I have a more balanced view of myself or others in the world? Right? So reflect for a couple minutes. Okay. Yeah, another nice point they make in that book is that, like, knowing that other people you have relationships with in your family or your friends, that they also have the same kind of bias to give attention to remember negative things that happen, and for those things to affect them more than positive things that happen in the relationship. Then when you make a mistake in your relationship with someone, you say something that wasn't very considerate, or was hurtful, unintentionally hurtful, or whatever. You have to remember that that mistake is going to be much more at the forefront in their mind than all the nice things or the good things you did to that person. So to make up for that, it's not that you can just do one thing, one nice thing, and that's going to make up for the one hurtful thing you did. It's going to take like 4 or 5 good things to make up for one hurtful thing you did, because of the bias that we have and the kind of attention we give to negative versus positive things. So then the second point I want to make is rumination. And so this is from this BBC article, The Danger of Dwelling. But actually I first heard about it in a nice study. I couldn't find the study when I was doing research for this. But there was one, a few years ago, there was one, I think, graduate student at some university in the US who made an app. He wanted to do a broad study of what are causes and what are hindrances to happiness. So he made this app that people could voluntarily download, and at random times during the day, this app would send a small questionnaire to people to say, how are you feeling right now? What are you on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being miserable and 10 being kind of ecstatic. How are you feeling right now, and what are you doing? What are you doing, and what are you giving your attention to? What's the quality of your attention? Like, how focused are you? And he found that there's a huge correlate between mental wandering, just like your mind being distracted, and your attention not being focused on anything specific, and being unhappy, right? So he found that when people report that they're unhappy, they're much more likely to report that their mind is also, their attention's not focused, their attention's just kind of wandering around. Even if they're doing a task, their attention's not focused on that task. So his takeaway was, whatever you're doing, the more you can keep your attention focused on the present moment and on the activity that you're engaged in, the more satisfaction you'll have in the course of that action. Then just letting your mind wander all over. And so mental rumination. Rumination is, one element, there's different ways to define it, according to different kind of frameworks in psychology. But, so one aspect of rumination is that the mind's not focused, the attention is just wandering around in an uncontrolled, unintentional way. So there's no conscientious, intentional focus of our attention on something. But another facet of rumination in many contexts is that you're dwelling on fears about the future, or things that cause you anxiety, worries about, worry and kind of resentment. So resentment, things that happened in the past, maybe things that you did in the past and you feel, guilty about it or feel bad about it, thinking about those things that other people did and feeling resentment about it, or things that you think might potentially happen in the future, like losing your job or becoming sick, or not finding the right partner, or the partner you are with falling out, or whatever. So just dwelling again and again and again about things that have a negative impact on your mind is a major leads to depression and anxiety. So it's quite common sense. So this is all under the heading of hindrances to happiness, right? So one hindrance is negative bias in the way we focus our attention, focusing more on negative than positive things. Another hindrance is just rumination, where we're dwelling on, thinking about things that have a detrimental impact, or I don't know, detrimental, but things that disturb us, that upset the mind again and again. So obviously one antidote to rumination can be learning, like meditation practice, like we did at the beginning of the session. Just learning to focus your attention on one object. And learning to, so just doing that, like cultivating a regular meditation practice every day where you spend 5 or 10 minutes or more every day, where the main activity of that time period is looking at what you're focusing your attention on. Right? It causes you just to be more aware the rest of the day where your attention's focused. It's like if you spend a half hour every morning just walking for exercise, then the rest of the day you're going to be more conscientious of how you're walking. When you're walking to work, you're walking around the home, or you're walking, to school, or going to somewhere else in the city. Just because you spend 30 minutes a day conscientiously walking as an exercise, during that time, naturally, you're more aware of, like, how do you walk? How's your posture? Do you stand upright or do you slouch? Do you walk fast or do you walk slow? Do you take short steps or long steps? How does it affect your breathing? How does it affect your heart rate? You become more aware of all those things, while you're walking intentionally. So then doing that for a fixed period as an exercise, then you're aware more the rest of the day, like how you walk. So similarly with meditation, for a fixed period of every day, you focus your attention on your mind and you're more aware of what's happening in your own mind, then naturally that makes it so the rest of the day you're more aware of what's happening in your mind and where your attention is going. Am I distracted or am I focused on the task at hand? When I am thinking about things, am I thinking about things that have a disturbing impact, or am I thinking about things that bring more peace and contentment to the mind? Am I thinking in a way that's just self-centered, or am I thinking in a way that's more concerned about and aware of enhancing my awareness of others, my connectedness with others? Right? So these are kind of antidotes to rumination. One is just learning to focus our attention through meditation and contemplative practices. Right. So that can help avoid depression and anxiety. Okay, so those are just two. Since we don't have so much time, then I won't go through more in that under that heading of hindrances to happiness. But of course, other obvious ones that aren't really like something that we're going to address like in this kind of context are hunger. If you're really hungry, like say you're so impoverished that you can't find enough to eat. Of course, that's going to impact your happiness. Or if you don't have a job, if you have a family and you don't have a job and you're worried about how to support your family, of course that's going to be a big impact on your happiness. Or if you're really unhealthy, if you have high blood pressure and diabetes and or you're just overweight or have don't get enough sleep, all those things are going to impact your health. Because they have a detrimental impact on your health, they weaken your immune system, you're more prone to illness. When you're sick, then you don't feel good, right? So you won't be happy. So those are other more gross things that you just have to have as a basis, There's a sort of a base set of conditions that we have to have. We have to have physical health, we have to have sustenance, be able to earn our sustenance, we have to have food, shelter, clothing. Another big one that actually we can work on is we need to be part of a social network, right? Being lonely is one of the biggest causes of happiness, is feeling isolated and alone, not having healthy relationships with other people in our family or friends, neighbors, community, in our workplace. So the more we have a network of healthy social relationships with others, then that's a huge boost for happiness. And also physical well-being. There's some studies I remember. So again, I haven't had that much time to prepare for this session, but when I've done this kind of similar course before, there's some very interesting studies done in like the Scandinavian countries, studying people over like 20 years and looking at their risk factors for heart attack and also their life expectancy. Generally, there's a strong correlation between people that have more friendships and more social bonding with others. The more they have, the longer their life expectancy. There's a strong correlation. And the less likely they are to have heart attacks and other illness. But then we'll come back to this. Then how can we build more healthy relationships? Because the opposite can also be true. If we have a lot of really negative relationships, we have a lot of enemies, people that we detest, and people whom every time we see we get annoyed and irritated and we just complain about, and we try to avoid them. If there's a lot of people like that, that's going to have a detrimental impact, right? Even though it's a relationship, but it's a destructive relationship, right? So how do we cultivate healthy, kind of supportive, loving relationships with people? Eventually it comes back to our mind, our own attitude. So again, this negative bias can be an effect. Whenever anyone we interact with, when we look at the negative things we see about them, it's not going to build a good relationship with that person. Whereas if we learn to look at the positive things, then that'll help to build good relationships with others. Okay, so then the second heading, looking at some different facts about a worldview. So this is, it's just curious because oftentimes you hear people say things like, oh, you know, these days the world is getting so much worse. There's more violence, there's more conflict, there's more depression, there's more suicide. Just everything's getting worse. What can we do about this? It's something you hear, you know, very commonly. So yeah, from a few years ago, then actually I started first getting a doubt about this about 5 years ago when I heard about this book by Steven Pinker. He's a famous psychologist and linguist in the United States at Harvard. He published this, became a very famous book called The Better Angels of Our Natures, I think. The Better Angels of Our Natures, where he challenged this idea that things are getting worse by looking at different data, sets of data that we've gleaned, you know, collected over the last couple hundred years. Of course, the more recent we are, the more recent you get, the more data and better data there is. But he looked at things like, in that book, like the number of wars, the number of people who die in wars, the number of suicides, the number of homicides, the number of violent crimes that are committed, like per capita, gross domestic product, you know, in different countries, the number of people in poverty, number of people in, you know, as a percentage of the population, number of people living below the poverty line, you know, in all different countries across, you know, all over the world, the number of people, number of women dying in childbirth, the infant mortality, the rate of, you know, children who die as infants before they reach the age of 1 or so. So all different data sets like this. He looked at literacy and access to education, representative governance versus authoritarian government. So how many people are living in representative, like a democracy or some form of democracy where they can vote and they can choose their government, their leaders, versus those who live in an authoritarian kind of style of government. Because the earlier has a stronger correlate to happiness. I mean, that's also, these studies have been done, you know, where are people happier? Are they happier in authoritarian governments or in representative governments? Representative governments, generally people happier. So looking at all these different data sets, he shows very clearly that actually the time we're living in now is like probably the best time that humans have ever lived, you know, in terms of peace, quality of life, access to education, life expectancy, health. It's like human beings have never had better circumstances, you know, in their history of humankind for the last 200,000 years than they have now. Like more people have access to education, there's less wars, less likelihood to experience violence, you know, inflicted upon you, less likelihood to die from, to be murdered, for example, less likely to die even from accidents, less likely to get sick, more likely to have education, less likely to die in childbirth or have someone in their family die in childbirth, and so forth and so on. So he looks at all these data sets and he's like, yeah, people are happier now. I'm not happier. People have better living circumstances than they have had ever. But then many people will say, yeah, but people have more anxiety, they're more depressed, there's more suicide now. So then you look at also this kind of data. That's what I was doing yesterday on the bus on the way to Bangalore, actually. I was looking at this. So this is from this website called Our World in Data. It's, again, an excellent website. So if you look at, like I was looking at India, then Britain, United States, then some like South Korea. Anyway, you can look at any country you want. You'll have the data from 1990 to 2018. You look at levels of, because even in this book, actually, he says at the beginning. I'll read the introduction. So I checked his data you can't see because he's making a comparison in the United States between 1957 and currently. Let me see if I can find it quickly. He's introducing why he's kind of writing this book. In the United States, rates of depression are 10 times higher today than they were in the 1960s. And the average age for the onset of depression is 14 and a half compared to 29 and a half in 1960. Right? So he's saying, in the United States, just look at the United States, rates of depression are 10 times higher today than they were in the 1960s. So that's really bad, right? If it's true. I'm not sure, I haven't found the source of his data. But so there's 10 times rates of depression are 10 times higher, which means there's more than 10 times people depressed because the population is so much increased. So if there's 10 times more, it means there's so many. The rate's 10 times higher, then the number of people depressed is probably like 15, 20 times higher. And then the average age, so this is also very concerning. The average age for the onset of depression is 14 and a half years old now, compared to 29 and a half in 1960. Right? So people becoming depressed at a much younger age. He's saying, the data I found on this other website was saying, it's true, the onset of depression, the age has come way down. But there it gives, in the US, it gives like, the onset is like average 17, 18 years old, not 14 and a half. So I'm not sure where, there's different studies come up with slightly different findings, right? As opposed to being in the 30s before. But even now, like it says the onset of depression in Japan now is like 30. Whereas in the US, it's like, in your late teens. In Europe, like early 20s. But on this website, it only has the rates of depression from 1990 to 2018. And like in the US, it's hardly any change. It's almost the same. In most countries you look at, between 1990 and 2018, so that's 30 years, rates of depression have not changed significantly. It's pretty much even, the same. Anxiety, same. Suicide, also the same. Like the rates haven't changed that much, but yet many of us have this impression that things are becoming worse, right? So a lot of that's what Steven Pinker, his second book, the first book I was saying is Better Angels of Our Natures, and then he got a big pushback, especially from people, liberals in academia, against a lot of his theories. So he wrote the second book called Enlightenment Now. Enlightenment Now, where he's talking about how so much of, not only we've, as humankind, we've made incredible amount of progress in the last 150, 200 years in terms of raising people's standard of living and education and general different measurements of the well-being of their life. It's increased exponentially. Like for example, in the number of people living below poverty line, global, it was like in the 1950s, 60s, it's like 2/3 of the world population. Now it's like a 20th of the world's population. So like so many, he was saying, if you look at, it's as if in the last 40 years, every day 200,000 people have come out of poverty. Right, so it's incredible progress. So in this book Enlightenment Now, he's saying so much of the progress that as humankind we've made is due to the Enlightenment principles that we should have, that society should work for the welfare of all as opposed to just for the welfare of a few, aristocracy, that we should have representative government, that people should have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, that everyone should have equal access to gainful employment. A lot of ideals, that came about out of the enlightened Europe. I mean, he's speaking as a Westerner, right? So he's not looking at Asia so much, but a lot of the ideals that came out of the Enlightenment movement in Europe around the 1800s, that's what's led to so much improvements, and that we need to not forget that, right? Need to not forget like what gave rise to so much progress, but rather use those same principles to resolve a lot of. Another one is just a scientific method. Like instead of depending upon religion, praying to a god to solve our problems, doing empirical research. Like what is it that causes, what is it that causes typhoid? What is it that causes pneumonia? What is it that causes? Think of some of the diseases that have almost been eliminated now, like smallpox or polio. Looking at what are the actual things that cause those and working to eliminate those rather than to kind of blindly engaging in like faith practices that don't do that. So in this book Enlightenment Now, he again presents a lot more like updated data about how things are improving. And how, one of his big theories about why we have this idea that things are becoming worse is because of the negativity bias that I spoke about at the beginning. Because what's reported in the media that we mostly consume are negative things rather than positive things. And because the positive things that happen are often long-term trends, Whereas negative things that happen are often just one-off events, this one day or 1 week or 1 month that are tension grabbers. But positive trends like 200,000 people coming out of poverty every day over the last 20 years, like how do you report that in the newspaper? It's not like a newsworthy kind of event, because it's not a one-off event, it's a long-term trend. Yeah. So so it helps a lot to improve your outlook about, and to make more realistic your understanding of what's going on in the world, to look at data, to look at facts. There's another book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, where, he's a very funny presenter. I think he's Swedish. I think he's passed away now. He was the Minister of Health, maybe Health and Education in Sweden for some time, back in I think the 80s. And then he recognized that the people who are in positions of decision making in the government, they have no idea about facts, about how many people suffer from what kind of illness and what kind of factors are the biggest detriment to their health, what kind of things will be the most beneficial for their health. People in decision making, they don't have access to the data, and so the worldview they have is based on data that is totally outdated, that they learned about in high school like 40 years before. So he made it a big kind of goal, a focus of his life, to try to educate mass society about like what are the current state of things now in terms of health, education, development, GDP, and so forth. So he has this really famous book. I think I came across it because it was in Bill Gates. It was like on Bill Gates' book list, his favorite book of 2018 or something. It's called Factfulness. And he has a really good website, actually, with his son and his daughter-in-law. They put together a really good website where they give free access to all this data, again, put in really clear graphs and charts, and you can see the progression of things over time.
Hans Rosling.
Yeah, Hans Rosling. The book is Factfulness. But if you just look up that, you can find all the other stuff. So personally I found, you look at actually what really are the changes that have happened in the world in the last 20, 30 years, and the state of things now. There's so much room for optimism, actually. Things have become so much better for most people. Which brings us to another question, because oftentimes, as a Buddhist teacher, I found myself explaining to people many times to people that, there's something we could say the 8 worldly concerns. This is a typical thing we talk about. It's called the 8 worldly concerns. So one of them is to say that, craving after or achieving fame doesn't bring you happiness, right? Achieving wealth, prosperity doesn't bring happiness. And then pleasure, specifically of the pleasure of this life, pleasure especially of the 5 senses, doesn't bring happiness, and praise from others doesn't bring happiness. But in one way, it's like all those things, they do bring a little bit of enjoyment. They do bring short-term happiness. But especially the one here I want to mention is prosperity and wealth. Right? As Buddhists, we often say that no matter how happy, how wealthy you are, that doesn't really bring happiness and satisfaction. And there's a degree of truth to that. It's like if happiness was something you could just, if you had enough money, you would definitely be happy. Then everyone who's has a certain degree of prosperity, they should be happy. Clearly, that's not the case, because we can all easily find examples of people who are very wealthy, very famous, very powerful, receive a lot of praise, even who are not happy, who are quite miserable, actually. But then if you look at the data, how is it? If you take like surveys, it's difficult to measure how happy people are. So one of the main methods to measure is self-reporting. Ask people, how do you feel? Are you satisfied? Are you very satisfied with your life, or just satisfied, or a little bit satisfied, or unsatisfied, or very unsatisfied? So you can take surveys, ask people a questionnaire to self-report. And then you can do other kind of physical measurements are difficult to correlate with happiness. And maybe, psychologists ask other kinds of questions to get an idea, how many healthy relationships you have, how do you feel about your job, how do you spend your time. I'm not sure. It's quite difficult to measure happiness, so there are different ways to do. But generally, if you look at surveys where psychologists try to measure people's sense of satisfaction with their life, their sense of contentment, and you compare that to the gross domestic product, GDP of the country they live in, generally countries with higher gross domestic product, people report greater satisfaction with their life, right? So there seems to be some correlation with higher standard of living, more affluence, more prosperity, and greater satisfaction with their life. And then within countries, if you look at people in different economic strata, people who are wealthier, people who are more impoverished in the country, generally people who are wealthier, they also report greater satisfaction, greater mental well-being in their life. So there does seem to be a correlation between affluence and happiness. I mean, like I mentioned earlier on, is probably one reason for that is, if you're really worried about how you're going to buy food next month, it's hard to be happy. You feel, because you're going to be full of anxiety about that. Or if you're worried, that you don't have any savings, so even you might have enough food to eat, you can pay your rent, but you think, if I have to get a root canal, for example, if I'm going to lose a tooth, how am I going to pay for that? Or if my child has to get hospitalized or something, I don't have any money to pay for that. Or if I lose my job, I only have enough money to live on for so many months, and then I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, and I might go homeless. So if you have those kind of worries, or not to mention worried about where to get, or living in a place where there's a lot of war, like in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's like these militias kind of roaming around. You think tonight someone might come and try to attack me, or you're homeless and you're living on the street, and how are you going to be happy, right? So there's a certain basic set of conditions that you need just to have your mind be kind of content, at peace. Which if you don't have those basic amenities, then difficult to have happiness. So I think when in the Buddhist context, when we're saying, prosperity or wealth doesn't bring you happiness, it's kind of assuming you have that basic, the basic support for your livelihood. And then on top of that, if you think by just accumulating more and more wealth, more and more possessions, more and more things, material things, that's going to bring you happiness, that's a mistaken idea, right? So that is actually there's some correlation for that. I don't have data for that, but, because the logic is the more stuff you have. Like when I go to the US, I see it quite clearly. People in the US, there's so much attention people give on stuff, buying things, then the things they bought, then returning them because they're not quite right, or the things, all the stuff that you have, storing it, or things that break, then trying to find a replacement for that. I see that much more. I mean, I live in a monastery in India, right? So we don't have a lot of stuff. So, but the amount of attention in conversation, the amount of time people spend on talking about their things, as opposed to talking about their own experiences, is really different. I notice that a lot when I go to the U.S. So, like the more material things we have to worry about like how to maintain all those things, how to take care of all those things, how to protect those things from being stolen. When they break, how do we replace it? We have so much more mental engagement with things, and then that distracts us from our own, like what's going on in our more like emotional lives and in our interpersonal relationships with others. Also like wealth, like the more money we have, the more we have to worry about where is it invested, is it performing well, what kind of taxes am I paying on it, how much taxes do I have to pay this year, how do we get out of paying the taxes, is my money manager, are they ripping me off, or all kind of worries come with taking care of anything. It's like having a child, and the more children you have, the more time you have to invest in giving attention to how to take care of your children. So, So material things, prosperity, can have that kind of drawback. Okay, so then the third thing we come to is cultivating happiness. So this is probably the most interesting part. So this is our third headline, and I have five subheadings here. So the first is becoming more aware, which I've spoken a little bit about more. Becoming more aware of how our level of satisfaction, our level of mental well-being, our happiness. Because happiness is something that's an internal experience, right? It's not something that people can give us, that comes from outside. It's not like we can go to one place and we'll be happy there. Or we can be with one person or one set of people and they will make us happy. Or we can have one set of possessions and they will make us happy. Or we can have one, like, one degree or, one achievement, like, winning an Olympic medal or something, and that will make us happy. So that's one nice point he makes very well in this book, Happier, is that happiness is not like a fixed, it's not like an end point that you reach. We often have this misconception that we do this and this and this first, I get a good secondary education, then I get a good undergraduate degree, then I get a good graduate degree, and then I get a good job, and then I'll be happy. Right? That there's an end point. That happiness is like, you do something, or, I meet this right person, and then, I flatter them, then we have a relationship, then we get engaged, and then we get married, and then I'll be happy. It's not like happiness, there's an end point. Or, I'll buy the right lottery ticket, then I'll win the lottery, then I'll have a lot of money, then I can quit my job finally, and then I'll be happy. It's not like happiness is the end point that you reach. You reach a certain point and you're happy. Happiness is a process. It's like you have to learn to be happy with what you're doing as you go, and you can progressively increase your happiness as you become more aware about what kind of activities, what kind of mental activities, or physical well-being and health, social interaction, what kind of things that you do, kind of mental attention, and kind of activities that you do contribute to well-being, and what kind are detrimental to your well-being. So that's what this kind of graph is about. Future, present, detrimental on one side and beneficial on the other side. So learning about what kind of things that we do are beneficial for us, the more we can increase those in the present. So there are things that are beneficial in the present and things that also contribute to benefit in the future, a long-term well-being. The more we increase those, the more we can become happier and happier and happier. And according to Buddhist view, without any end point, without any limit, actually, the amount of happiness we can have, well-being we can increase, without limit. Versus what kind of things we do are detrimental to our physical well-being, to our mental well-being. So the more we engage in those, of course, the more unhappy we become. So the first is, I'll just run through the list of 5 headings I want to get through. First is just becoming more aware. Then, understanding that happiness is a gradual progression versus as an end state. Then the third, learning different rituals, and like happiness boosters, he calls them, but rituals, small isolated activities we can engage in repeatedly that contribute to our well-being. Finding meaning in life is a huge factor for happiness, finding meaning. And then gratitude, practicing gratitude, generating gratitude is the last one I want to come back to. Okay? So the first one, becoming more aware. So look at this graph. So he's saying, he lists 4 different kinds of, what does he call them? It's kind of like life strategies, you could say. He has another term, but I forget. But one is the rat race, over there. And then happiness, is the one we want. And then a hedonistic kind of life. And then a nihilistic kind of life. So he fits these on this graph. So here's the future. This vertical line is future, meaning our future state of being, whether it's beneficial, future state of being, or detrimental. And then the horizontal here is the present, right? Our present state of being, whether it's, or present activity, whether it's beneficial or it's detrimental, right? So he's saying someone who's caught up in the rat race, they're here. So in terms of the present, they do things that are detrimental to their happiness, to their well-being. So he's saying like this, that they keep, a person who's caught up in this rat race mentality, it's like they keep thinking, I'll be happy when, I can be happy when I achieve this. So like when you're going to school, you go to these miserable classes, you engage in, you enroll in these classes and courses that you don't really have any interest in, but you think if I study this, then I'll get into a good college. And then in college you do the same thing, if I study this, then I'll get a good job. And then when you have the job, you think, well, I'll do this job, even though I'm not interested, I don't really like it, but if I have this job, then I'll make a lot of money, and then when I made a lot of money, I can retire early, and then I'll be happy. So you keep delaying your happiness. You keep thinking, okay, it's like for the short-term pain, I'll have long-term gain. So you keep sacrificing doing something that's really satisfying to you now, and you just do things that your parents tell you, or society tells you, or you think, for whatever reason, you think, I should do this thing even though I don't really want to, but that's what I should do so that I can have happiness later on. Right? So you end up spending so many years doing things that you're not really happy doing. So you're sacrificing present benefit and you're experiencing present detriment to your happiness in order to gain future benefit and happiness. And it might be the case that actually, if you do, get a good job, make a lot of money, get all this kind of stuff you want, have a relationship with the person you want, that in the future that you can have the kind of retirement that you want. But it might not be, it's not sure. So he's saying that's this rat race mentality, where you do a lot of things now that you don't really like, you don't really enjoy, in order to, you're always chasing after this thing. But then oftentimes when you get to the point where you achieve the thing you want, you find also that's not really satisfying. Like this author gives the example of, I think he was a national squash champion in Israel when he was like 16. So it's a nice short example, where, for 5 years he was doing all this training, training and doing so much hardship so that he can be the best squash player in Israel. And then he had this, idea that once I've achieved this, then I'll be happy. And then the very night he won, and he celebrated with his friends, and he was saying the very night, then finally at the end of the night he comes back to his room to sit down and kind of bask in the glory and enjoy, and he felt this same sense of emptiness in his mind, that okay, now I've won this, but then what? It's not really ultimately satisfying. So the rat race mentality is like you endure all this hardship, thinking it'll bring you some kind of lasting happiness later on, but then whether it really does or doesn't is a big question. So we'll come to this one last. Hedonistic is the opposite. They don't care about the future. Why plan for the future? It might never come. Just enjoy the present moment. Do whatever you want that's going to bring immediate pleasure right now. Go travel, do whatever, work as little as you can. If you do work, just do something that's easy and it's fun and nice doing. Drugs, sex, rock and roll, whatever you enjoy, just do it now and don't worry about the future. So that's future is detrimental. You're not really planning for the future. So whether, you might do things that are not good for your health, things that are destructive your relationships, things that you close off opportunities for the future. So, but in the present, it's beneficial for your happiness and enjoyment. But in the long term, is it leading to your well-being or not? Is the question. So that's kind of hedonistic mentality, right? So again, the downfall of that is in the future. Then the nihilistic mentality is kind of like, is very negative, someone with a very pessimistic outlook on life, thinking, basically life is suffering, which is a Buddhist view actually. but we try to be optimistic in Buddhist, so the interpretation is slightly different. But thinking that, life is just, kind of sickness, misery, conflict, the world is a terrible place. So really pessimistic view, thinking, there's no point trying to be happy because I'm just not like that, or people who are really happy, they're just faking it, or it's shallow to be, kind of have this view. Apparently, according to Mathieu Ricard, one Buddhist practitioner, a lot of French people have this view that, one scientist, she said Russians kind of have this view too, that, someone who's really, really happy, it's because they don't really know the truth of life. If you know the truth of life, you see the suffering, and you're sad, basically. You're fundamentally sad. So he's saying a nihilist is this kind of outlook. Someone, they don't enjoy the present, and also they don't really have any hope. They don't have this hope for the future. The rat race person, they're always holding out this hope. I'll be happy in the future when I achieve this. The nihilistic person, they're resigned to just misery, to not enjoy. Think that's maybe not even a possibility, right? So then, to achieve happiness, he's saying you need to find a way to live your life that is beneficial now. You can enjoy what you're doing in the present moment now. So one aspect of that could be back to the study I was talking about, how rumination leads to depression. Whereas being fully engaged in the present moment, whatever you're doing in the present moment, being fully aware of, fully engaged in that, fully focused on that, brings satisfaction. You can fully enjoy whatever you're doing. You do well because you're paying attention. But also, you can enjoy all the nuances, the little subtle things. Like when you're washing the dishes, think, well, how's the light striking the water? How's the feeling of the water on my hands? How I appreciate being able to have light, clean water just here in my kitchen, or how I enjoy the meal I just had, or once I clean these plates, they're going to be so clean and ready to have the next meal. Like, as a mundane example, right? But being fully focused on whatever we're doing in the present moment brings satisfaction now. And then we can engage in activities that bring benefit to our happiness in the future, right? So instead of having this, as opposed to the rat race mentality, where we're always feeling like we have to sacrifice, we have to make personal sacrifice now. We can't enjoy what we have to do, like things that we don't enjoy now in order to achieve future happiness. Learning to live life in a way that we can enjoy what we're doing now, and also that contributes towards long-term happiness in the future. So they're saying this is the wisest one. What leads to happiness? So this requires awareness. It requires looking at. And what's one really nice thing about this book, just to pump this book a little bit, is that he has these, like here, he has a lot of meditations, a lot of meditation instruction, meditation on happiness. Throughout the book, he says, like, okay, pause here and think about like what we just had. He calls them time in, these little time in things. He encourages you to pause throughout the book and think about for yourself. So, yeah, in that vein, why don't we do that now? We can pause for a few minutes and think about, well, I mean, you can think about anything I've tried to describe or explain so far, but maybe especially about these four kind of sort of life strategies: rat race versus hedonist, nihilistic, and happiness. And I don't know, we can probably, one way you could do is look at situations when you followed each of these. Probably at some time we follow each of these patterns, and which one are you overall, and how can you, is there a way that you can try to change the way you engage in life to have more satisfaction now in the present moment, and also engage in things and do things in a way that they're contributing towards long-term satisfaction. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Try to think about these four strategies, how it applies to you. So we'll take, say, 5 minutes, okay, and just reflect. Okay, let's continue. So, yeah, I'll just touch on the next few headings, and then we'll take some time for a question and answer and discussion. We'll have a break. So, just under this heading of becoming more aware, what we do mostly here in the Buddhist context and at the center is becoming aware of especially mental states, looking at our internal world, our internal experiences, the kind of concepts that we develop toward objects, towards ourselves, towards others, towards inanimate objects in general, and then the kind of emotions that we give rise to, whether destructive emotions or positive emotions, and learning how to modify our way of thinking, thereby learning to modify what kind of emotions we experience in different situations, and then how that contributes towards our happiness or our unhappiness. So basically, the Buddhist idea is that actually all of our unhappiness, all suffering, arises from distorted, incorrect, mental engagement with the world, with ourselves, and with the world around us, with others. So that through ignorance, basically, incorrect or mistaken way of perceiving things gives rise to this exaggerated sense of self, which gives rise to exaggerated sense of dualism between self and other, which gives rise to dividing other into things that I like and things that I find desirable, and things which I dislike, things which I find undesirable, and then generating attachment, unrealistic, because it's all based on ignorance. So this distorted, unrealistic expectation and attachment towards things I like, expectation that those things will bring me happiness, and then and distorted aversion to things that I don't like, right? So which becomes anger and hatred and so forth. So that all of our suffering, and then through that we engage in karma, intentional actions, which are based on this fundamental ignorance, which gives rise to disturbing experiences from life to life to life. Right? So the Buddhist strategy is it comes back to the mind. Everything arises from the mind. But here in psychology, modern psychology, it's slightly different. So anyway, so that's becoming more aware of causes of happiness, causes of unhappiness. This is the first heading. The second heading is, just what I already discussed pretty much. Realizing that happiness is not an end state, not having this unrealistic expectation that once I get this job, or I meet this partner, or I move to this place, or I know this set of people, that will bring me happiness. So it's not that happiness is an end state that you achieve once you do something, but it's a gradual progression. So another interesting, one YouTube video I watched was by a researcher in positive psychology. So most of his data comes from the field of positive psychology again. It's very interesting. Many studies show that we tend to just maintain a baseline, or I don't know if you call it baseline, or a kind of a stable state of well-being. And for different people, it's different. For some people, they're continually kind of not very happy. For other people, they're continually very happy. Most people kind of in between somewhere. But we have this expectation. For example, he showed this chart. People's experience of happiness when they get married, right? So over a timeline, say over like 10 years. So for the first 2 or 3 years, when you first meet the person, then you feel happier. Then the peak of the whole experience is the day you get married. You're the happiest. And then after that, generally it's like goes down, declines. So you go back to the baseline state. And the baseline state is a line that runs right to the middle. So for many, many experiences like this, also with a job that you get, or promotion, there's you have this baseline state where you start from, then you want the promotion, it looks like you're going to get it, closer, you actually get the promotion, that's like the peak of your happiness. And then after that, gradually it's just not as satisfying as you expected, and you go back to the baseline state. Also, the lottery. They study people who won the lottery. Like before they won the lottery, kind of then a spike. They win the lottery, you're ecstatic. But then gradually the satisfaction, it wears off, and you come back to the same baseline state. Also with trauma and tragic experiences, it's interesting. So again, there's this baseline state. People have someone suddenly, someone close to them suddenly dies. They become very unhappy, and that lasts usually, a few weeks, few months. But then gradually, after 6, 7 months, they get over it and they come back to the baseline state. Or even people, they become refugees. They're like caught up in a war and they have to leave their home. Same thing. There's a period of like trauma and tragedy where things are very difficult, but quite quickly they recover and come back to the baseline state. So he's saying, this researcher is saying, we have this unrealistic expectation that fixed things, like winning the lottery or getting a promotion or getting married, will bring us happiness, but actually that's not the case. Rather, the way we need to achieve happiness is to try to make a steady progression up, where our life becomes more and more rich through a whole complex of different activities. So it basically comes back to this awareness, of becoming more and more aware of the daily activities I engage in day to day, which ones are beneficial for my short and long-term well-being, which ones are detrimental. So getting rid of the ones that are detrimental and increasing the ones that are beneficial, and making that a constant progress, so that we just gradually have a better, like a higher quality of life. We gradually have greater satisfaction, right? So seeing happiness not as an end state, but as a progressive. It's like a project that we're kind of working on continually to increase. So that brings us to the next one, is rituals. Rituals. So here, not in the sense of religious rituals, but in terms of like little things that we do every day. You know, like sweeping our apartment, sweeping our room, or sitting down enjoying a healthy breakfast, or watering the plants, or taking care of a garden. Or talking with someone, maybe talking with our spouse or our children or our parents every day, for a few minutes or something. Or reading, just quietly reading books that we like. So these regular little things that we do, kind of in a ritualist. They're rituals because they're things that we do in a fixed way and we do repeatedly, every day or every week or at a regular time, that bring us some kind of satisfaction. So he's saying, increase those. Learn, have a set of things that you do regularly. Here's where another place meditation can fit in. Meditation can be one of these rituals. But even in the Buddhist instructions, how to do meditation, it's not like you just sit down and just start watching your mind. There's a whole set of rituals that go with it. Like the first one is sweeping your room, actually. Because if you try to meditate in a place that's cluttered and unclean, you won't feel comfortable, actually. You'll feel like something's not right, like something's left undone, like things are out of place. I mean, for different people, the degree of this varies, but generally, in the Buddhist text, the first instruction for when you meditate is sweep the room. Then another ritual is put out offerings. So it's like before we have a session here, we put out water bowls and flowers and put on nice lights and offer incense. Like none of those are meditation, but they're all like supportive things. And it's a ritual, You empty out the old water bowls, wipe them out, bless them with incense, put in new water. It's something very small, very simple, but it's quite satisfying to do. Or go for a walk, a place you like to go for a walk. Or, clean the kitchen. Or there's all kind of, make a nice meal. Like for me, I know sometimes in the monastery, sometimes when I'm not feeling good, feeling a little weak, or just kind of, fed up with things, I like to make like pasta. Usually we have rice and dal and vegetables every day. For me, like a special kind of ritual is like, okay, today I'm not eating the ordinary food, I'm going to make some like spaghetti, and like with fried onions and tomatoes and lots of oregano and basil, because that's what I grew up eating, that kind of food. So it's kind of like a comfort food. But having a comfort food can be like a little ritual. And you sit down and just eat it leisurely and enjoy. So add these kind of rituals to your life, things that are like, they boost your happiness. But again, without unrealistic expectation. That's kind of a short-term well-being. But then a more long-term well-being is find what's most meaningful to you in life. Like take time to discover for you, like what's the most important principle in your life? What's the most important goal? What is most important to you in your life? Like if you imagine yourself at 100 years old and you're looking back at your life, what is it you would want to see that you've done? How have you used your life? Is it something that seems worthwhile and like a worthy life and meaningful? Or, none of us want to look back at our life and think, I wasted it. I just frivolously, whiled away my time in just kind of totally meaningless way that I'm old and empty-handed. I have nothing to show for it. So take a measure of, what is it that you as a human being who has this, this incredible fortunate opportunity to be alive, to have education, to have supportive family, to live, live at a, this time when you have so much access to different possibilities and information, and you can choose. You have so much freedom to choose how you're going to use your life. Then what do you want to do with it? How do you want to use it in a way that's most beneficial for you, most beneficial for others? So what's most meaningful to you? So for many of us, we don't come to this kind of question or this kind of investigation until we become really sick, and we think we might die, or almost get in a car accident, and we're kind of shocked. We realize, I really could die. Or someone close to us passes away, or we experience a huge kind of dejection, or a huge loss, or some kind of shock that we realize, oh, everything's not, I can't take things for granted as it happened in the past, or we face some kind of crisis, and then that causes us to do some intensive personal reflection. But for many people, near-death experiences, you read accounts, studies of people who've had near-death experiences where they're having asthma or asphyxiation or almost drowning, or having cardiac arrest is the biggest one. Many people, they're clinically dead for a period of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, and then they're resuscitated. And many people have very traumatic experiences during that time that they're clinically dead. Where they go through a tunnel of light, they feel this in the presence of this being of all-pervading love, and many of them, as they have a life review, it's a very common experience, where it's like almost in a dream, but it's like they go back through memories of everything they did, everything that happened in their entire life, with special clarity about what things they did that were harmful to others, and what things they did that were helpful, what things they did that were good, and what things they did that were bad. It's like taking account of all their karma they've created in that life. So for many people, it's very interesting, again, to read these studies of near-death experiences and the impact it has on people. Many people, they come back with a much more positive outlook on life, and much more committed to just using their life in the best possible way, being the best possible person they can, and really trying to generate loving kindness for all beings, all living beings, and even the inanimate environment for all beings. Feeling like that is the most meaningful thing in life. But for each of us, it's going to be different. I mean, you have to do your own investigation to find what you think is most meaningful in life, and then connect everything you do to that, right? So instead of all your activities in life being kind of disparate, scattered, separate activities, like your work, the person you are at work is kind of one thing, and that's kind of, what you do at work is sort of one category that's separate. The way you relate to your family is something separate. The way you spend your time with your friends is separate. The way you spend your time alone is separate. That those are all just separate, compartmentalized, disparate aspects of your life. Rather, have those all conjoined as one part of this one project, to achieve the kind of life you want, or the kind of what you think is most meaningful in life. Make that kind of the glue that holds everything together, or the measure by which you decide to do any activity. So that every activity that you do in life is it's all an interconnected, organic part of one long-term project. So then that thing that's most meaningful, like in the Buddhist context, it's either becoming free from samsara, or becoming fully enlightened, or just, benefiting other sentient beings, right? But again, for everyone it's different. But then connect everything you do, every aspect of your life, whether it's your work relationships, your family relationships, your personal recreation, everything is connected to this long-term project. So it imbues everything you do with meaning. So that brings a lot of satisfaction. And then the final one is gratitude, practicing gratitude. So both of these books, they're totally different books, like The Power of Bad and Happier. They both recommend keeping a gratitude journaling every day, like taking 5, 10, 15 minutes every day or every few days, and just spend time writing about things that you're grateful for. Or, if you have children or a spouse, make that like a ritual that you do every day. Spend a few minutes talking to each other, explaining to each other about things you're grateful for that day or in general. My sister and her husband, I didn't tell them about this at all. They just came to this their own. I think through reading other psychology books. They have 2 young children, especially their son. They have a son and a daughter who's a couple years younger. Their son had a really difficult time sleeping. He's very kind of, what do they call it, a spirited child. It's like hyperactive, basically. So, a really difficult time falling asleep. So one of the strategies they used to help him fall asleep was the four of them, or actually we used to be three before my niece was born. Before his bedtime, just for 10 minutes before bedtime, they would sit together and each say things that they're grateful for that day. So sometimes when I'm visiting, I got to join them. It's very nice, ritual. You know? It's very simple, but it's very, I don't know, it's something very positive. Because a lot of times we so much easily give feedback about things we don't like to each other. But oftentimes we don't really give good feedback about things that we like. And oftentimes, you know, I found in a conversation, you hear another person say things they're grateful for, and it's like you never would have heard them actually talk about it. You don't really know that that's even something that they're aware of or that they're thinking about, is on their mind. That, you know, by having that conversation, you learn so much about that person. It's something very positive, and something that, you know, you can come back to ask about or talk about more later on. So either journaling or, also you can just do meditation on gratitude, which is what I want to do at the end, right? So now we'll stop for a tea break, and then we'll have question and answer. And then at the end of the session, we'll do a little meditation on gratitude. Okay? So yeah, so just to review, we had three main outline headings. The first is hindrances to happiness, and then under that was negativity bias and rumination, and how those hinder our happiness. Then looking at different facts and data about how the state of things in the world as a way of offsetting our negativity bias. How things are, generally things are not nearly as bad as we think. The big thing I left out was global warming. That is much worse than we actually think. No. That's the big kind of outlier, is that it is really bad. I mean, actually global, what is it? No, climate, instead of climate change, climate destruction, I think, is this term people use now. It's much more accurate. Like this one guy, anyway, I should not talk so much. So anyway, looking at different facts to have a more balanced view of the world. And then the third, cultivating happiness. So different ways to cultivate happiness. Then I went over becoming more aware of causes for and against happiness, realizing it's a gradual progression and an end state, engaging in more different kind of ritual behaviors, regular behaviors, finding what's most meaningful, and then generating more gratitude as cause for happiness. Okay? So yeah, if you have any questions, bring them back after the break. So let's stop for refreshments.